Hello everyone, myself Pavitra Vagas from Department of Information Science and Engineering, Shri Venkateshwara College of Engineering. Today I'm going to explain about the advanced CSS layout. The topics which I would cover are normal flow, positioning elements, floating elements. CSS, which means cascading style sheets. What is a normal flow? Normal flow, which refers here, is to how the browser will normally display the block level elements. Block level elements. Tag P, which defines the paragraph. Tag division, div, which defines a division or a section in an HTML document. Tag H2 and tag H2 marks the first subheading after your document's main heading. Tag UL. The tag UL defines an unordered list. Tag Table. It defines an HTML table. In this, each contained on their own line. Each of the tags are contained on their own line. Because the block level elements begin with a line break, that is, they start on a new line. Without styling, two block level elements cannot exist on the same line. Block level elements use the normal CSS box model in that they have the margins, paddings, borders, background colors, etc. The above figure shows the block level elements. In this, the first block is the HN, H1, and the second one is the UL, that is the unordered list. Next the paragraph tag, next the division tag, H2, and then again the paragraph tag. Each block here exists on its own line and is displayed in the normal flow from the browser window's top to its bottom. By default here, each block level element fills up the entire width of its parent. You can use the CSS box model properties to customize for instance, the width of the box and the margin space between other block level elements. Next comes the inline elements. These elements do not form their own blocks, but instead they are displayed within the lines. Normal text in an HTML document is inline as elements such as the image tag and the span tag. Inline elements line up next to one another horizontally from left to right on the same line. When there is not enough space left on the line, the content moves to the new line. The above figure describes the inline elements. Here the inline content is laid out horizontally left to right within its container. Once a line is filled with the content, the next line will receive the remaining content and so on. Here, the content of this paragraph tag elements is displayed on two lines. If the browser window resizes, then the inline content will be reflowed based on the new width. Here, the content of the tag P elements is now displayed on their lines in the second figure. Here comes the types of an inline element. Firstly, the replaced element. Second one is the non-replaced inline elements. Replaced inline elements. These are the elements whose content is defined by some external source such as an image tag and the various form elements. Replaced inline elements have a width and even the height that are defined by an external resource. Next comes the non-replaced inline element. These are the elements whose content is defined within the document, which includes all the other inline elements. Width of these elements are defined by their own content, and the width property is ignored, as are the margin top, margin bottom, and the height. Block level elements will flow from top to bottom, while inline elements flow from left to right within a block. It is possible to change whether an element is block level or inline via the CSS display property. Consider the following two CSS rules span, that is the display block and the display inline. These two rules will make all span elements behave like and block level elements, and all tag li elements like mline, that is each list item will be displayed on the same line. Li is nothing but the line. The figure describes the block and an inline elements together. A document consists of block level elements stacked from top to bottom. Within a block, inline content is horizontally placed left to right. Some block level elements can contain other block level elements. For example, a div can contain other blocks. In such a case, the block level contents inside the parent is stacked from top to bottom within the container, that is the tag division. Next comes the positioning elements. It is possible to move an item from its regular position in the normal flow and even move an item outside of the browser viewport so it is not visible, or to position it so is always visible a fixed position while the rest of the content scrolls. The position property is used to specify the type positioning, and the possible values are shown in. The left, right, top, and the bottom properties are used to indicate the distance of the element which moves, and the effect of these properties varies depending on the positioning property. Here are some values and its description. Firstly, the absolute. The element is removed from the normal flow and is positioned in a relation to its nearest positioned ancestors. Fixed. The element is fixed in a specific position in an window even when the document is scrolled down. Relative. The element is moved relative to where it would be in the normal flow. Static. The element is positioned according to the normal flow. This is the default one. Next comes the relative positioning. In relative positioning, an element is displayed out of its normal flow position and it is moved relative to where it would have been placed before. The other contents around the relatively positioned elements remembers the element sold position in the flow. Thus, the space of the element would have occupied is preserved. The positioned element now overlaps other content, that is the paragraph and the element following the figure. Element does not change to accommodate the moved figure. Here is a figure which describes the relative positioning. Here the figure is described, that is the border is 1 pt solid and the background color is identified with a tag, and the padding is kept at 5 px, width is 150 px, and the position is relative because it is a relative positioning, and next the top is at a 150 px and left is positioned at 200 px. Next comes the absolute positioning. When an element is positioned absolutely, it is removed completely from the normal flow. This is unlike with the relative positioning. Space is not left for the moved element and it is no longer in the normal flow. Its position is moved in the relation to its container block. The container block is the body element. Like with the relative positioning example, the moved block can now overlap the content in the underlying normal flow. A moved element via the absolute position is actually positioned relative to its nearest positioned ancestor container. That is, a block level element whose position is fixed, relative, or absolute. In the example shown in the figure caption is absolutely positioned, which happens to be its parent. The figure describes the absolute positioning. Margin is 0, border 1 pt solid, background color is been identified with an tag, with an hashtag and its code, padding 5px, width is 150px, and the positioning is absolute positioning. Top, it is 150px and the left is 200px. Next comes the z-index. Each positioned element has a stacking order which is defined by the z-index property. Closest to the viewer has a larger z-index value. The figure describes how the z-index is given a value less than 0, then how it is positioned. Descendants change as well. Thus, both the figure and the figure caption move underneath the body text. Fixed position. The fixed position value is used relatively infrequently. It is a type of absolute positioning, except that the positioning values are in relation to the viewport, that is, to the browser window. Elements with fixed positioning do not move when the user scrolls up or down the page. The fixed position is most commonly used to ensure that the navigation elements or the advertisements are always visible. The figure describes how the fixed positioning in its position regardless of what part of the page is being viewed. Floating elements. It is possible to display an element out of its position in the normal flow via the Css float property. An element can be floated to the left or floated to the right. When an item is floated, it is moved all the way to the far left or far right of its containing block, and the rest of the content is reflowed around the floated element. The floated block level elements must have a width specified. If we do not, then the width will be set to auto, that is automatic, which will mean it implicitly fills the entire width of the containing block, and there thus will be no room available to flow the content around the floated item. The figure describes how the floating element is. Floating in container. It should be reiterated that a floated item moves to the left or right of its container, also called its containing block. The containing block is the HTML document itself, so the figure moves to the left or right of the browser window. The floated figure is contained within an article tag element that is indented from the browser's edge. The relevant margins and padding areas are color-coded to help make it clearer how the float interacts with its container. In this illustration, we can see that the overlapping margins for the adjacent P element behave normally and collapse. But the top margin for the floated figure and the bottom margin for the element above it do not collapse. The figure describes the floating in container. It shows the margin area, that is 5px, 50px, and then the padding area, and it describes how the paragraph is being displayed. Floating multiple items side by side. One of the more common usage of floats is to replace the multiple items side by side on the same line. When we float multiple items that are in proximity, each floated item in the container will be nestled upside the previously floated item. All other content in the containing block including the other floated elements, will flow around all the floated elements. Here are some problems and solution for it. Problem is, as the browser window increases and decreases in size, that is, in the containing blocks resizes. The solution is, we can stop elements from flowing around a floated element by using the clear property. The values of this property are shown and demonstrates how the use of the clear property. The figure describes how the floating multiple items side by side works. As the window resizes, the content in the containing block, that is the article element, will try to fill the space that is available to the right to the floated elements. Here are some values and its descriptions. Firstly, the left hand edge of the element cannot be adjacent to the another element. The second value is right. The right hand edge of the element cannot be adjacent to the another element. Both the left and the right hand edges of the element cannot be adjacent to another element. None. The element can be adjacent to the other element. Containing floats. Another problem that can occur with floats is when an element is floated within a containing block that contains only the floated content. In such a case, the containing block essentially disappears. The figure describes how the containing float is. Here we can notice that in this figure, the element content area has shrunk down to 0 over here, and it is now has padding space and the border. The figure containing the block contains only an caption element, and both of these elements are floated to the left. Both elements have been removed from the normal flow, and from the browser's perspective, since the figure contains no normal flow content, it essentially has nothing in it. Hence, it has a content height of 0. To avoid this, a better solution would be to use the overflow property. The figure describes the setting the overflow property to auto solves the problem. Overlaying and hiding of elements. One of the more common design tasks with CSS is to place two elements on top of each other or to selectively hide and display the elements. Positioning is often used for smaller design changes such as moving items relative to other elements within a container. In such a case, relative positioning is used to create the positioning context for a subsequent absolute positioning move. An image that is the same size as the underlying one is placed on top of the other imagining absolute positioning. Since most of this new image contains transparent pixels, it only covers part of underlying image. The below figure describes the using display property. There are, in fact, two different ways to hide elements in CSS. First one is by using the display property, and the second one is using the visibility property. The display property takes an item out of the flow. It is as if the element no longer exists. The visibility property just hides the element, but the space for that element remains. While these two properties are often set programmatically via JavaScript, it is also possible to make use of these properties without programming use. The hover pseudo class demonstrates how the combination of absolute positioning, the herb pseudo class, and the visibility property can be used to display a larger version of an image when the mouse hovers over the thumbnail version of the image. The below figure describes the comparing with visibility, and the second one describes using hover with display. Here I complete with my topic. Thank you. Have a nice day.